Thank you for joining us at Better Intonation, Better Life. Last time, we began talking about this exercise progression that can help you familiarize with your basic units whole step and half step. Today, we'll be advancing further in this exercise progression by adding fingers and create multiple spacings to handle. And by adding fingers, we'll be opening up almost all the possibilities of finger spacings within the position, with the exception of extensions and exceptions of the system. And in the next two videos, we'll be talking about how to skip fingers correctly and how to shift between positions. And then we'll be all covered with the basics of the system. Basically, this intonation system is all about what position are you in and what are you doing within the position. This further progression of adding fingers, we're going from single spacing to handling multiple spacings at once. While it's very common for us to play with multiple fingers on the violin, but don't underestimate how important it is to build this step correctly, because handling multiple spacings at once is directly linked to how fast you can play. For example, this excerpt from the Tchaikovsky Concerto. So there are so many notes. So if you look at each note as one command, and there are so many commands, what, like 30? And so you can only go so fast. But if you're able to analyze the situation first and see this as two combos, because they really are just two combos. First one, and your fingers still remain in the same spacing combo throughout the position in the last one. And the next one, also same combo throughout the position. And then your fingers also go all in order, right? So you just pop them out and connect them, right? And that's how you play faster. It's by grouping things into combos rather than note by note. And let's be honest, we all want to play fast because it's cool. So of course, before we can do that in a piece, we have to build this concept into our technique first with the exercise progression. So let's just add the third finger to our 1-2 finger spacing for now, and let's use whole step and half step as an example. So let's see, what does a whole step and half step create? Over 3 strings, over 4 strings, get the point. There are lots of possibilities. So as you can see from some of these possibilities of chords, compare them to the chords of one single spacing. The difficulty level has jumped from like 1 to 20,000. And it really shouldn't, just by adding one more spacing, right? Let's walk there with our exercise progression. So as we first form the exercise in this current step of the progression, we have to make sure we do not skip any fingers. As for the next video, and it has to be executed correctly. So we'll talk about it separately. But let's just start with fingers all followed by each other. So we have to create this sequence of 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, rather than 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, having that 1, 2, 3, 1 skipping finger in the middle. So you want to have this graph in your head as you do the exercise just like before. Have all 3 fingers built on a whole step and half step across 4 strings in your head, and know that you'll be creating sequence within this graph. And just like before, as you do the sequence, you want to discover notes and note relations while you do them. But single spacing speaking, they should not be new at all if you have already done the single spacing exercises that we talked about the last time. What we're doing is just to add a second spacing to execute at the same time. And when we execute multiple spacings at once, we call it a combo. So we're going to start with all of them on the same string. And without skipping fingers, there are 4 options of finger orders. First one is 1, 2, 3, 2, as we mentioned. And there's 3, 2, 1, 2. And then 2, 3, 2, 1, and 2, 1, 2, 3. And then, so those are the 4 options without skipping fingers. So after having done them all on the same string, you want to start crossing. And crossing is where it creates many more variations. You can decide when you cross over, when you cross back, how many times you cross. And if you just go in order, you can start by crossing the last note. And then cross one note earlier. Etc. And then you can start crossing twice. Right? And you can also cross up to 3 times like this. And at this point, there are actually only 7 options of how you cross. But I'll list them here as an example. But the variation theory you already understand, so you should be making the variation on your own. But you should know there are really only 7 of them. And you want to apply this to the 3-2-1-2, 2-3-2-1, and 2-1-2-3. And make sure you familiarize each one till it feels easy before you move on to the next one. And don't forget, if you have already mastered the single spacing progressions, crossing or not really shouldn't mean any different to you. We're just adding the second spacing, so it gives your brain a little bit more information to execute. And this little information really should not be like scrambled eggs in your head. It should be very simple and very systematic, because it is. 2 spacings going order is a whole or half each. In this case, whole plus half. So whatever you're doing, what sequence you're creating within the exercise, you should just think to yourself, whole plus half. And we're very lucky it's not like a lock combo on a save, left 17, right 33, and then left 48. It's not complicated like that. Each one only has 2 possibilities. So train your brain to be very simple, very centered on the simple piece of information, and very engaged on what you discover are the note relations. So the next step, we're going to start crossing over to 3 strings. And the good news is that there are only 4 options crossing 3 strings. The first one, next one, next one, and the last one is crossing 3 times, including crossing back at the last note. There are only 4 options, and make sure you do that on the 3-2-1-2, 2-3-2-1, and 2-1-2-3. And once you start crossing to 4 strings, it's down to 1 option because there are only 4 notes. So lots of the note patterns, you'll find them very bizarre sounding. And this is actually a good reminder for us that the tonality of our music and our fingers are not designed for each other. This is especially why we have to organize our technique separately without chasing after the notes. Because chasing after notes has been clouding our view of how simple the left-hand technique is really. So for example, this whole time you're listening to all these weird note patterns, but you cannot forget that graph that says all we've been doing is the same 3 places that build a whole step and a half step across 4 strings within the position. So after we have done all the 1, 2, 3 fingers, whole plus half combo, all the different orders and string crossing within the position, we're going to progress further by one of the 3 options. First one is to transpose, which is my favorite because you just take everything you have practiced just now to a different position to be based on a different note, and then pretty much gain all the new notes and new note relations from the last one you just practiced. And the next one you can do is to practice the 3 other fingers. Instead of 1, 2, 3, you practice 2, 3, 4. And the third one is to practice different combos. And the good news is that there are only 4 combos when you have 2 spacings, which is whole plus whole, half plus half, whole plus half, we just practiced, and the half plus whole. And after doing a good amount of the 3 note sequences, you can progress forward by adding your final finger and execute 3 spacings at once. And then you also want to start without skipping fingers. So your pattern would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, etc. And let's just use whole step plus half step, like the scale as an example. So it goes like this. And then you will start crossing. And then you also start crossing back and forth, and there are going to be a lot more variations, and you already understand how to make the variations from the 3-string examples, and sometime I might come out with a list of the complete variations, but for now I think you should use what you already understand about how to progress and make variations. And while there are so many variations of string crossing timings to practice, but it's also good for you to know that in terms of the 3 spacings, there are only 7 variations, which I'll list them all here. And you'll notice that half, half, half is missing from the list because that is considered an exception of the system. Because 3 half steps will put your hand not properly in a position, because your 4 fingers will not be each assigned to a new note. It would go like this. It would be like 2/3 of a position. And I can count with my one hand how many cases I've come across in pieces that you use 3 half steps. Actually, only one I can think of right now, which is this passage in Isai 3. This kind of situation really happens so rarely in pieces, and then it makes your hand go so out of position in a way, so it is not important to practice as one of the basic combos. So at this point, having 4 fingers and 3 spacing combos and all the string crossing possibilities, you might feel very overwhelmed by all the variations you have to do. But it's actually not important that you do all of them all the time or all of them at once in one day. Because if you have gotten to this point with 4 fingers, they're already not new. All the spacings have been practiced in the single spacing exercise, the 2 spacing exercises. By having 4 fingers and 3 spacings, you're really just learning to get used to executing multiple spacings at once. And you should think of this process of familiarizing as a relationship and not a purchase. To familiarize is to experience it often in different ways and to see situations through it to make it into your second nature. So it is actually more important that once you move on to practicing pieces you're working on, that you see your pieces through the system. You should continue to engage your mind when you practice pieces to see all the situations in the pieces, what kind of whole step, half step combos they are. For example, the Tchaikovsky that we mentioned earlier. So this passage, as I mentioned earlier, there are only 2 combos. The first one is 2 whole steps, and then you go from the first finger all the way to 2nd finger on the A string. Right? And the next part is based on the D and all whole step, 3 whole steps, and go all the way to the 3rd finger on the E string. Like that. 2 combos. So the next 2 bars, some of them after you move on to the next string, the combo slightly changes. But the first few notes, 2 whole step. And now half whole whole, whole whole. So if you can think quickly, right? 2 whole, half whole whole, 2 whole. And the next combo, everything stays the same till the very last one. Instead of whole whole, it's half half. So, right? So the next one, the first position becomes 2 combos because it changes slightly on the A string. So we go from 2 whole into 1 half. And the next part is 3 whole and then whole half. So if you can think quickly also, right? And then the next one, the lower position stays the same combo, half whole, and now whole, half, whole. Back to 2 groups. If you can really think of this passage in terms of combination, and if you can really move from one combo to the next quickly, you can play it pretty fast. Just like that. I'm only thinking in terms of combos and what notes they're based on, and that's why I can execute them very quickly. There you go. That is how you implement these combos of spacings in a real piece. Lots of students often ask me if there is a book they can read that will improve their intonation. I've always thought that's a silly thought. It's like learning about the exercise progression, but not practicing it and not implementing it into the pieces you're playing. The exercise progression will help launching your mind into thinking in the way of the system. But what is more important is to implement what you have learned from the exercise progression and see the pieces you play through the system. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Sorry, that's Murphy.